Woodworking videos on YouTube are great. And if you're like me, then you probably agree. But there's one cohort of people that they may not be that great for. And that is the hobbyist looking to get into woodworking or venture further into this great craft. And that's because he will constantly be inundated with images of gloriously decked out shops and magnificently expensive tools. And most of our homes and bank accounts ain't set up for that kind of setup. So that's what I'm going to help you with today by giving you the TAP, Tool Acquisition Playbook, for setting up a great home hobbyist shop without breaking the bank. Hi, I'm Daniel, and I like to make things out of wood. I also like to make videos for beginner to intermediate woodworkers. The videos are generally focused on tips, tools, and builds, and I do it all for my less than 200 square foot shop. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can see more. All right, let's get into the video. Now, our number one axiom that's going to be the foundation of our TAP is going to be this: don't go broke. So unless you're one of those people who vacations in outer space, we can't afford to just make it rain on all the tools. We've got to separate them into tiers to decide which ones get disproportionately more of our resources and which ones get less. And to be in that tier that gets less, the tool has to meet one or both of two criteria. The first criteria is it has to be a tool that is somewhat basic in nature, so that as you move up the cost ladder, there are diminishing returns for what you get for your money. Tools in this category would be tools like a drill and an impact driver set, a jigsaw, a circular saw, and miter saw. For example, this is my old Wind jigsaw. And the only reason I don't still have it is because someone I sold another tool to asked me if I'd be willing to sell him the jigsaw as well. And I said, sure. And this is my current Bosch jigsaw. It's great. I love it. I really do. But can you tell the difference between these two cuts? Yeah, me neither. Anything in the Wind, Ryobi, and skill class would be great for these tools. And the second criteria that would land a tool in this tier is that it's just used so infrequently that it just doesn't make sense to spend money on a Bosch or DeWalt or, heaven forbid, a Festool version of the tool. And this is where my tool portfolio is heavily invested in Wind. But the tools I just showed you, you don't have to have those initially. You can pick those up along the way. And to move up a tier to the tools you'll want to devote a bit more money to, the criteria is kind of the opposite. They would be tools that you use frequently and or you'll lose more in terms of features, quality, accuracy, or safety by going with a cheaper brand. Tools in this tier would include the sander, router, and table saw. I'm not saying you need to go all Festool and SawStop on me, but I would avoid scraping the bottom of the price barrel on these. These are my two sanders. The DeWalt is a 5-inch random orbital sander, and it's my recommendation as a good do-everything sander. The Bosch is a bit bigger at 6 inches and also has an aggressive mode. These two sanders are great, and I've never needed anything more than what these provide, which is why I can't recommend a more expensive sander like a Festool or a Mirka, as you can get both sanders for less than the cost of one of these more expensive sanders. But I also use them on every project, which also makes me reluctant to recommend anything cheaper. And for routers, if you're only going to get one router, one of the 2+ horsepower kits is going to be your best bet, and you can always add a palm router later if you want to. I did a video comparing the top 3 kits on the market, and the Skil would provide everything that you need. But if you wanted to drop a few extra dollars on the Bosch, I'd understand because it's going to be one of your most used tools, and it does have a bit nicer fit and finish. For table saws, you're basically going to be choosing between a job site saw, a contractor saw, or a cabinet saw. I've owned all 3 at one point or another, and given the cost, size, and mobility, I really like a job site saw for your first saw. And my best recommendation is the DeWalt 10-inch job site saw. It's been rock solid for me, and it's had enough power to build anything that I've wanted to. I love the rack and pinion fence. It takes a dado stack, and at 36.5 inches tall, it actually stands taller than most of the competing saws, which is a big deal for me. My current and probably final saw I'll ever have is a 3 horsepower SawStop, and I love it. But ultimately, the table saw you choose is probably going to be heavily influenced by your space constraints, your budget constraints, and your electrical constraints, whether you have 220 in the shop. Now, of the tools we just went over, there's actually a secret to getting the most out of them that we'll cover a bit later. But about those same tools, you might be wondering, should I get corded or cordless? Corded tools have a ton of advantages. One is that they tout constant power as long as they're plugged in. Another advantage is that modern cordless tools, on the other hand, have plenty of power, provided you're using a large enough charged battery. They can often be had cheaper, as they often come in combo sets and on sale, so that the tools can try to get you into their battery platform. Cordless tools are often brushless, where their corded counterparts are not, which makes them more efficient, quieter, and requiring of less maintenance. And most importantly, they're safer. Cordless tools often have a blade or spindle brake where the corded ones don't. Not to mention, unwieldy cords can be a trip hazard. And cords have the potential to get caught in stuff while you're using them, causing you to damage your project or something much worse. So if you decide to go with cordless tools, the next question may be, which brand should I get? Now, I know conventional wisdom says to pick a color you want and just go with it. But I have a theory that's slightly more radical, and that is get whatever tools you want. I mean, that's it. They don't have to be on the same platform. The tool companies would like for you to buy all their tools if you buy just one, but you don't have to. For example, just because I like this DeWalt router, it's actually one of my favorite tools, but it doesn't mean I want to spend DeWalt money on the other cordless tools that I just don't use that much. Like my multi-tool and my recep saw are Metabo. They're cheaper than DeWalt, they get the job done, and like I said, I just don't use them that much. Now, if you want your shop to have a certain color scheme or you prefer a certain brand, by all means do that. But just don't think that you have to. Now for me, milling lumber is one of the more satisfying and relaxing parts of any project. And if you're unaware of what that is, it's basically taking lumber that looks like this and making it look like this. And in that process of taking rough wood and making it square, two machines do most of the heavy lifting, the planer and the jointer. And of these two machines, you definitely want to get the planer first. And typically you're going to be choosing between a lunchbox planer or a commercial planer. Except there's one planer that stands alone as a single bridge between the lunchbox planers and the commercial planers. And that planer is the DeWalt DW735X. This guy. This planer is kind of a unicorn in that it slots in right between the lunchbox and the commercial planers. And I feel pretty confident in saying that this is the GOAT planer for the hobbyist workshop. I'm not saying that if you already have another planer, you need to sell that one and buy this one, although you might want to. But if you don't have one yet, this one is definitely the one to get. I promise you won't regret it. And the reason I say get the planer before the joiner is because you can more easily replicate what the joiner does with other tools. It'll just be way faster to do with a joiner. And I see a lot of joiner advice that says you should opt for an 8-inch joiner over a 6-inch joiner, as you'll find that a lot of the boards you'll be jointing tend to fall in that sweet spot of 6 to 8 inches in width. The problem is, an 8-inch joiner like this runs off of 220 electricity, and most of our shops are not equipped with 220. So assuming that is the case, the real question becomes, should you get a 6-inch floor model joiner or a benchtop joiner? And unless the only thing you make is pencil boxes and keepsake boxes and more pencil boxes, then the answer is emphatically the floor model jointer. The benchtop ones just aren't substantial enough to handle any stock of any real size. But that raises another problem, and that is the price, because the floor model joiners are not cheap. But I got something for that. Now, we all love getting new tools, but when it comes to building out a home hobbyist shop in a cost-effective manner and buying large tools like a jointer, bandsaw, and if you're fancy, a drum sander, secondhand is the best hand. And there are a couple reasons I say that. The first one being obvious, and that's cost. Each of the tools I mentioned will cost over $1,000 new, and it's not uncommon at all, at least in my area, to find used versions for 50% or less of the new MSRP. The second reason is that you can treat the used tool purchase as sort of a long-term rental that can play out in one of three ways. And I happen to have all three possible scenarios here in my shop. Scenario 1, buy and sell. This drum sander behind me, I bought it. Turns out, I don't use it that much. So now I'm gonna sell it. I got to use it as much as I wanted to, and because I bought it used, I won't lose any money when I sell it. Scenario number 2, buy and hold. My joiner over there, I bought it, it's been great, so I just continue to use it in the shop. Scenario number 3, buy and upgrade. My current bandsaw is an upgrade after having bought a used model. After that time with the used bandsaw, I knew what features I liked and didn't like. So I knew exactly what I wanted when upgrading to the new model. And you might say,
Daniel, if used is so great, why not buy all our tools used?
Good question. For me, it comes down to cost benefit because it costs time to buy used tools. You have to search for the tool, do a little research to determine what you're willing to pay, negotiate with the seller, arrange pickup, etc. And for me, it's worth it to save hundreds of dollars on a drum sander, but not for saving tens of dollars on a palm sander. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's a secret to getting more performance out of your tools, regardless of the price range of said tool. But before I get into that, I wanted to mention that I'm not really getting into that many specific tools for building out your hobbyist woodworking shop. But I do have a free downloadable where I recommend specific tools for 3 different budgets. So if you want to take a look at that, there will be a link in the description. Okay, the secret that you need to remember to get the most out of your tools is that it's all about the consumables. And by that I mean saw blades, router bits, sandpaper, etc. For quality of cut, a cheap saw with a good blade is better than an expensive saw with a bad blade. And most of the blades that come with saws are not great. But you don't need to break the bank on a $100 saw blade. Anything in the Diablo, Spider, or CMT class will be great. For router bits, cheap ones are okay for bits that aren't going to be used that often. In fact, you may have heard it before, but you're probably better off buying a big cheap set of router bits to start, then one-offs as you need them. And for a few of my one-off examples, I purchased a higher quality 1/8 inch roundover bit and chamfer bit because I use them so frequently. But when I needed a 3/4 inch roundover bit for a project, I didn't envision using it that much, so I went with a more budget-friendly option. And as for sandpaper, you might be surprised how much of a difference a good quality sandpaper makes. I know I was. A quality sandpaper can result in longer lasting sheets, less time sanding, and better dust collection. All right, that's all I got for you today. I'll see you on the next one. Y'all take it easy.